Hell, I made this channel so that I could talk about the photographs that I've taken and the stories behind them. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know that sometimes I can rant a little bit, and this video is a bit of a rant. Right now, as the Omicron variant bears down on the world, my state, New York State, and other states and other nations are strongly considering versions of lockdowns that we haven't seen since the early days of the COVID pandemic in the spring of 2020, like when I took this picture. For me, that brings up a lot of raw emotions and a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and a lot of anger. I still can't believe that we are where we are. But that's kind of a whole other story. I think one of my earliest memories of the pandemic was a video that was done by some celebrities who were doing a rendition of the Beatles song, Imagine. Full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of the Beatles, and I really don't like this song for quite a few reasons. I think it's kind of dystopian and collectivist and materialist and just uncomfortable to listen to, but it gives people a warm, fuzzy feeling inside, perhaps, and they like it. And I'm sure that there were people who were comforted by this video, and perhaps the celebrities doing it, they meant it from the bottom of their hearts to do something good. But I also suspect they did it because it's self-serving and promotional at a time when everything was locked down, when movies weren't even being made and concerts weren't even being held. And I'm sure that celebrities and entertainers have suffered in their own way during COVID, as they had trouble getting work. But still, so many of them live on piles of cash, and they weren't affected the way that the average person on this planet was affected by COVID, and still is affected by COVID. And that reminds me of something that I can't stand about celebrities and our celebrity-obsessed culture. Not only are most celebrities just very much out of touch, but socially, they are always playing with house money. By that I mean they don't have consequences to the things that they say, because pretty much everything they say is just status quo. I think it would have been far more revolutionary and counterculture of a celebrity back then to just say, pray, hope, don't worry, and let's get on with things as best as we can. But instead, they were comfortable with everyone being locked down. And that brings me to something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and that is just how incredibly obnoxious our celebrity class is, particularly when they communicate with us through the channel of social media, and even more particularly Twitter. Twitter reminds me of these pissing troughs that I saw in Ireland at these bars. They were just meant for you to take a leak or put your cigarette or dump your beer in. Just a cesspool of disgustingness. And yet, this is the realm that our celebrity and political class occupies. And they breathe down our necks with their edicts and their self-righteousness and their pompousness. And it drives me mad, and it should drive everyone mad. Just recently, the actor Seth Rogen got himself in a little bit of a controversy. Rogen lives in Los Angeles, which is a city that is really filled with a lot of crime lately. And yet he chose to castigate another person for complaining about being burgled or robbed or having their car broken into. For the multimillionaire actor Rogen, it's nothing to have his car broken into and his possessions stolen. For the average working man, that could be pretty devastating, but for Rogen, it was all right. He can handle it, and he certainly wouldn't want to offend anyone by saying maybe the Los Angeles Police Department should be more active policing his neighborhood. And it's this type of cowardice that just pisses me off in politicians and celebrities. They are almost always playing with house money, and they rarely bear the consequences of the things that they advocate for. And this was less than a year from the last time that Rogan embarrassed himself in a Twitter spat with a Canadian evolutionary biologist who pointed out that Rogan's convictions, his socialist convictions, are buttressed by the fact that he's wealthy and he doesn't really bear the consequences of the things that he advocates for. He has nothing to lose by espousing Hollywood's status quo of champagne socialism. And I don't mean to make this video to go punch at the left. I'm on the right, at least sort of on the right. And I know that there are people on the right who are also participating in the toilet of Twitter. Most definitely. Our former president was on Twitter constantly. It probably cost him his presidency because most people, they don't want to hear you talk on Twitter. They want to see you solve problems. And I think that showed just how out of touch Donald Trump was. But I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of talking about Donald Trump. He's gone. He's not going to be president again. For many people, he's a memory, maybe a bad memory, but he's gone. And yet, if you were to look at the blue check Twitterati, you see that Donald Trump is very much their fixation, the all-encompassing issue that they just cannot get off of their minds and that they just cannot stop tweeting about, in much the same manner that Trump just couldn't keep himself from tweeting. But if you were from another planet and you looked at somebody like Rob Reiner and you look at his Twitter feed, you would think that the greatest existential threat to the United States and to the world and to the concept of democracy was Donald Trump. You could be forgiven for thinking that the January 6th Capitol riots were the worst thing that ever happened in American history. Because, quite literally, Donald Trump, and now January 6th, is basically all Mr. Reiner tweets about. And he's not alone. He's not the only blue-checked celebrity that is tweeting about Trump and the temporary riots that happened on that day in January. He's in good company. And I'm not downplaying the January 6th riots. They were stupid, and they were based on not exaggerations, but lies by Donald Trump. But still, within, an hour of the Capitol being cleared, Joe Biden was certified as the next president. This was not a coup d'etat. This was not like what happened in Chile in 1971, where the military literally took out the elected president, a socialist, took him out, and then basically made it so that he had to kill himself. But if you look at Meathead's Twitter feed, you just see that every day, all he tweets about is Donald Trump and January 6th. And meanwhile, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world and in our country that the average person is much more in tune with than Donald Trump and January 6th. In just the past year and a half, even before Biden became president, the economy took a giant hit. Kids had to learn remotely. Businesses were shut down. We experienced historic rioting in this country that we hadn't seen in over 50 years that caused billions of dollars in damage and cost a lot of people their lives. But to Rob Reiner, or say Bette Midler, it's all about Trump. It's all about the morons who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Not about the cost of food or being able to put gas in your car or send your kids to school. Nah, it's Trump. And it would be laughable, except for the fact that these people are the elite. They do actually have a lot of influence. And like those celebrities singing in the early days of the pandemic and urging everyone to stay home and just take it, they aren't going to suffer the consequences the way that the average person will, the average working person. Years ago, I worked in the New York State Legislature, and I remember Mark Ruffalo was quite active lobbying us on environmental and energy bills. Now, I never dealt with Ruffalo personally, but I know people who did, and this was a man who was very vocal about putting solar everywhere and banning hydraulic fracturing for natural gas. And yet, he didn't know how bad some of these bills were and how they would affect the average working person here in New York State. And now apparently he supports removing gas stoves from buildings in New York City. And that will be something that is borne by working people, not Mark Ruffalo. And I'm not saying this to crap on Ruffalo. He's probably a good actor. I've never watched the Hulk movies, but I do remember a movie that he did years ago called You Can Count on Me with Laura Linney, and he was fantastic in it. And I think he should have an opinion on things. Everyone should. He's a citizen. I just don't really give a crap what he has to say because I know that he will never be affected by the things that he advocates for. Just recently, a jury in Chicago convicted Jussie Smollett on charges related to faking a hate crime against himself. Now, when that alleged event happened in January 2019, the average person knew it was completely fabricated. But that didn't stop our celebrities and our political class from tweeting that Mr. Smallett was a victim and that we lived in a really racist society. Never mind that we live in a country that has made massive strides on race because it fit the narrative and because it would cost these people nothing. They just tweeted and tweeted about the wrongs that had been done to Mr. Smallett. And this was only a few weeks after a teenage boy was falsely accused of a racial provocation against an American Indian man during the March for Life in Washington, D.C. It's easy to pile onto a 17-year-old who's awkwardly smiling when you have nothing to lose for doing it. And now that the dust has settled on that case, none of these people are issuing apologies. Not one single person is doing that. They're simply playing with house money, social currency that we don't have. None of these people are taking big stands. They're just going with the flow. They're going with the establishment. To maintain the status quo is what they do. And I'm reminded of something from several years ago. A French teacher from Virginia who lost his job, a popular teacher with his students actually, who was fired by his school board for not using a student's preferred pronouns. And he took a stand. He said he didn't believe it. He tried to accommodate the student as best as he could. He tried to just use no pronouns. But he was fired, and this is a man with children and a lot to lose. And he stuck up for what he thought was right. Now, does that mean that his school district had to come down on his side? I don't know. That's an issue for the courts, I suppose. But up until a few years ago, we didn't have the idea of preferred gender pronouns. We simply relied on what the faculties of human reason bring to us, which is that there are male and female. This man had everything to lose, and boy did he lose it all, at least as his job is concerned. I don't know that he's found another job teaching French. For all I know, he could be working at a hardware store right now. And at the risk of getting too political as I wind down my rant, I'm thinking about the easy road that we can take or the hard road that we can take. And when it comes to celebrities, and even most of us, we choose the easy road. I'm seeing celebrities cheer for Liz Cheney. And Liz Cheney has taken a stance against former President Trump. And Liz Cheney, up until maybe a year ago, would have been considered vermin by these people. She is a strong supporter of the type of military intervention that destroys countries like Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan. And her father, at least in my lifetime, was the architect of probably the most disastrous and immoral war that the United States has fought. And she supported him in that. But now she's a hero to the blue checks on Twitter, and she will face no consequence. And so as Omicron bears down on us, and as there's this supposed national reconciliation on January 6th, and on race and gender, please remember that the people that are the most divisive right now are not the average person. It's the establishment. It's the gatekeepers. It's not really people on the left or on the right. It's those who speak without any consequence or fear of consequence. because for them to say what they say doesn't come with any price. They can just keep saying it. But meanwhile, the average person, the working person, the mother, the father, the stiff who pours your coffee or fixes your car or builds things, they're the ones that have something to lose, to speak up, to agitate for the things that they care about, not the verified blue checks on Twitter, not our betters in entertainment and politics and sports. And so I just want to encourage you as much as possible to speak your voice as best as you can and as calmly as you can and with the best intentions and the most humility. And I think the people that really matter around you, they'll listen. Well, anyways, I want to thank you for getting all the way through this video. God bless you, and may 2022 bring a better year.